But I started wondering, where did these bands come from? And of the 15 bands that were at Monterey Pop, this was 2 years before Woodstock, okay? This was some record executives and Paul McCartney and some of the mamas and papas saying, jazz gets all the attention. Jazz was still the cool thing. Jug band, country music was hit, if you can believe it, the period I'm going to talk about. But, so they held it at the where the Monterey Jazz Festival is held, but they got rock acts, and they were trying to build up the rock business, which, so, 2 years before Woodstock, and this was an amazing festival. I'm going to keep this PG-13 because we have some children in the room, but if you ever watch the film, you'll see Simon and Garfunkel performing. They were already considered squares because they were still playing folk music, if you can believe it. And they're bathed in all red light. And let me just say the sound man had run into Stanley Owsley, a regional chemist, and he thought they looked great in red light. I'm a light guy. I brought one of my stage lights, and I've got like a ton of stage lights. I like lighting, but they kind of overdid it in Monterey. Kind of overdid it this whole decade. But most people, when they think of the 1960s, they have like one image in their mind. And especially if you were from Orange County, sort of more conservative parts of California. They combined the radicals with the artists, with the hippies. And they were just like, oh, they're all the same, they're all long hairs. So you might have had the Berkeley free speech movement people, and then the group that I'm going to talk about tonight. There's too much of a topic, big topic to cover to combine the whole thing. The great authors and historians haven't cracked the code on how did the counterculture happen. So I'm certainly not going to pretend to know how it happened. So I decided I'm not going to drill into the Berkeley free speech movement that we'll call the radicals. Radicals are people that want to force change. Bohemians want to escape the change, which the change was the rigid Eisenhower era. 2 terms of a conservative president. It was a stifling time for a lot of people. Fear is, the fear of the atom bomb was a daily thing in the 50s. So besides the rigid, bland 1950s, you had, every day you worried about atomic threats. So that's the backdrop. And you had largely 2 groups, we'll say Berkeley and the Peninsula. And if any authors are going to be watching this online, I'm sorry, I'm just netting out the history as I've read it. Sure, if 400 pages, you could detail this. But I have read a lot. I've read a number of books on the subject, and I have interviewed a number of the musicians that are but I think even my conservative friends would agree that the 50s were bland and rigid, and that's the way I liked it. So I'm going to talk about the Bohemians, the ones that want to escape troubled world or society. Counterculture means it's a group that's opposed to the existing establishment. A cultural renaissance encapsulates incredible short period of intense creativity and output. And so the roots of the Summer of Love and Monterey and everything happened a decade earlier, started out in Menlo Park. The history of Kepler's books. That's ground zero. It was a small bohemian community. You had Stanford was it's not as rigid as their reputation sometimes would make you believe. They actually had some very progressive and forward-looking psychology and philosophy departments, and they would hang out with the Beats and the Beatniks and the musicians at Kepler's books. And life on the peninsula in the 50s was like an Archie comic book. I mean, it was like a playground. It was half the number of homes and residents in Belmont. A home was 1/10 the price that it is today. But not everything was all rosy. There was a generation gap that was widening. And the generation gap, that phrase came from the 60s. So there was some anxiety. Americans are an anxious people in general. That goes back to the 1820s. But every generation says, we're the most anxious generation. They've been saying that since Emerson and Thoreau. So once you start to, you kind of go, oh, where's the creative center? Where's the heartbeat of this thing? And Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead are sort of the representative of, he was one of the social influencers of the day, as we call them today. Besides, and I try not to be a Jerry worshiper, but you just fall for the guy. Right? My sister bought me this 45 for Christmas in one of her vinyl stores in Carpinteria, where she lives. But they played the Cow Palace, and I'll show you the program. This was a time of great change and very fast change, and these guys were at the forefront of it. As Ron Meager told me, they were, compared to the Dead, he said down the street, the Beau Brummels did play in Belmont at the Inn Room. And I call that Belmont at the crossroads because it was accessible from, Beau Brummels played there, but they had a residency at the Morocco Room in San Mateo, where they really got their chops. And so I could go on and on about them. But everything changed, and there were already dozens of garage bands formed in the Bay Area. Okay, they were estimated in the decade of the 1960s. One estimated from a really good assessment by a historian, 180,000 garage bands in America. Now, when the Beatles came to the Cow Palace, they had already been on Ed Sullivan in February, but no Americans had ever seen them. And the launch of their first American tour was the Cow Palace of all places. To me, just the sound system alone would we're not going to go to that event. It was the same PA that they used to auction cows. And you're bringing the lads over, right? But John Lennon, you can see on the right, is looking down at the stage. This is the famous jelly bean shot, okay? Some Bay Area fans, and the ticket prices were $40 to $50 in today's money. Okay? Everybody that carried an instrument or wanted to play music went to see the Beatles. Somebody misread something about George and read it as he loves jelly beans. And it was an English dessert, it was not jelly beans. But the kids came with pocketfuls of jelly beans and pelted the boys while they were playing. That can hurt. And Sean's like, what the hell is landing on the stage? It was really rowdy. This is only 6 weeks after the Republican National Convention was held in Cal Palace, which was, I don't know, a hot mess, probably not the right word, but it was a cluster. If you ever want to read about the history of politics, check out the GOP's convention in '64. And not to slow down one bit, San Francisco was moving fast. They had the Beatles here. And they returned a year later. And so this is a glimpse. This is when I was with the Beau Brummels. They were really proud to pull out these old flyers. You probably can't read those names there, but this was organized by a very great record promoter, Tom Donahue, radio man, head of Autumn Records, and just a mover and shaker. So there's a little bit of payola. You know what payola was? You rented the venue, and you put your artist on your label. You had him play at the Cal Palace. And Ron Meager was having a birthday the day he was playing there, and one of the famous artists was like, "Oh, is that your birthday cake, Ron? Happy birthday!" And he just shoved his fist into the birthday cake backstage. And these guys are surrounded by these rock stars, pop stars. But the Beatles had just played. Ron goes out on stage, and he just shook his hair. He was like getting the sweat off or something. And he heard all the girls scream. Because he's the only one in the band with long hair. And after that show, all the guys were growing their hair out. But these were, I don't even know so corny, a swim party. Let's do the swim. Maybe Kevin will show us some of the dance moves. Before both of our time. But this was pretty wild. Not my favorite venue for live music, and they still have the same cow auction PA. But this is one of the things that's never talked about in the history of music. You know, somehow every artist appears to be from LA, right? Stevie Nicks from they're not from LA. Let's do a check on the history. The same about how the peninsula rated on a national level. The sensing an opportunity with this live music and these garage bands, and seeing Tom, Donahue running around and all these organizers, the developers decided to build out clubs along Elko. And there were more clubs along this strip. The density of venues per square mile exceeded for a time Nashville, New York City, or LA. Okay. Ron Meager again told me you could make a living as a musician playing here. And being in bands, I could tell you today, you can count the number of venues on one hand that are available, and you have lots of bands oversubscribed to play them. So it was a little different back then. Just to give you a sample, we're going to zoom in on the interim in a second, but to tell you how raucous this was, dancing was not allowed, or it's hard to get a permit. If you served alcohol, it was almost impossible to get a dance permit. Bars were really rowdy back in the day, and they still are if they serve hard liquor. I tend to leave a place at 11:30. I say the wild turkey's kicking in, I'm out of there. But they really enforce this. Remember I talked about the Eisenhower 50s, rigid, conform or else. Well, that translated down to the county sheriff's level, and they did not want any dance parties, but they allowed teen clubs. And dancing was okay there because they didn't serve alcohol. In the teen clubs, some of them were open till 5 a.m. Now, like an amateur, total amateur historian, I was like, what parents in their right mind? Now, it wasn't attracting, it was attracting adults who wanted to see live music and dance. So, one record label, Epic Records executive came up here and met Sly from the Family Stone, met Sly outside of the Winchester Cathedral in Redwood City at 5 a.m. And he must have been blown away by the performance because he was ready to sign him. He goes, you want to get some pancakes? Sly signed a contract with Epic Records over an IHOP pancake breakfast. Awesome. Sly was a musical prodigy. At 19 years old, he produced the Beau Brummels' first couple of records. 19. One of America's great
Could you say like where some of these were?
The in-room is Belmont. Okay. The hub of the peninsula. That was an old slogan, but I'm going to bring it back. Anybody know who America's first supergroup was? Straight up first, number one in all categories. It was the Kingston Trio. I saw your hand up, sorry.
Bill Haley in the comments?
Oh man, what a great guess. Excellent guess. Yeah, their hit record, Rock Around the Clock, was the number one hit the month I was born in 1955. But they didn't sell as many records as a trio of folk artists who were organized around Stanford. They played in a club called the Cracked Pot Garden. Terrible name. I had the honor of getting on the phone with Al Jardine, one of the co-founders of the Beach Boys. And again, these folks will talk to you if you're interested in how they came up in the business, the root story. Ask me about something other than, what I'm known for. So I really had to do my self-calming exercises before I got on the phone with a Beach Boy. And he told me he really looked up to the four freshmen and the Kingston Trio, and that if you ever seen the Beach Boys wore striped shirts and they got that right. They stole that right from the Kingston Trio. But the Kingston Trio was hitting on all cylinders in top five in every one of the chart categories. A young Lindsey Graham, wow. Lindsey Buckingham, the real Lindsey that paid attention to, was 13 years old in either Menlo Park or Palo Alto. It's debated where he grew up, but he was listening to the Kingston Trio on the radio. And he was blown away by the finger-picking guitar and the smooth harmonies of the trio. So these folkies the radio was important, records were not as common, but Lindsey today learned his finger-picking from the Kingston Trio, and it's amazing to watch. While most garage bands were satisfied to rule in their home turf and stay where they were, like anybody ever heard of the Chocolate Watch Band company out of Los Altos? Amazing cover band of the Rolling Stones, and it actually, if you could get a record from England and then copy it and sound like a Liverpool Mercy Beat band, you are going to be hot for a time. But most of these bands were happy to stay home in their little towns. But others had set their sights higher. They wanted to move up to San Francisco, but there weren't venues to play yet. At the same time, you got to look at the technology of the time. Amplification and sound engineering were growing rapidly. The Warlocks were living together in the Chateau House. Remember I said walking to Gangeezy? Hey, can I borrow some sugar? amazing. But this is similar to the British invasion bands who cohabitated together. You know, Keith Richards waking up Mick. Oh man, I got this lick over here. And that's how you really get ahead in the business. You live with your. Want to move in, Kevin? I know you. So there was the in room at 635 Old County Road. And you can have a look at my infographic over here, and it's available online. This details the bands and where they played and where they got their chops and in what year. But I didn't just add the Go-Go Girls. Go-Go, believe it or not, they were Go-Go Girls. It was a thing in the 60s. You could not, women's liberation. Okay, we're talking about before 1960. Remember Bland, Eisenhower era, Conform or Else? A hit song called The Twist by Chubby Checker came out. It's the first time ever that girls and women didn't need a man to lead them on the dance floor. They didn't even need a man. They could just get up and dance, right? That was radical at the time. And when you don't issue dance permits, and women are very liberated, and this was Archie Comics land, it's like, oh, hey, we're hiring go-go dancers. And try and picture this motley crew, you know, the women would dance to the beat of the band, okay? And these guys were a blues cover band at the time, and pretty funky. Has their lead singer on the right there, Pigpen, Rod McKernan. But as the band learned space jams and long extended improvisations, there was one issue: the Go-Go Girls would get tired. They're like, guys, what happened to the 2.5-minute hits? You're like wearing us out. So, if you're into art and graphics, the logo on that bass drum was designed by a former roommate of the band in the Chateau House. And he is he plays banjo, and his name is Shub, and he invented some of the best capos, call them capos, looking at the guitarist, capos, and he was an amazing artist. When Jerry got home one night after a gig, and he's like, "Hey man, he wakes up, his roommate goes, we gotta change our name." A band in New York, before they became the Velvet Underground, Lou Reed was the Warlocks. So he's like, "Oh, we gotta change our name." And the roommate artist was like, "Damn man, I thought I was gonna be your logo licensing guy." But the residency was pretty grueling. The Dead were booked for 2 months. They played 6 nights a week. The clubs were open every night for live music. So the peninsula wasn't always so sleepy. 6 nights a week, 5 sets of music every night for 2 months. So this was kind of like the Beatles doing the Hamburg and the Cave. They were getting their chops. But they needed to take breaks. And during breaks, this is Old County Road, right across from the Silicon Valley Inn, great name, on El Camino. And so that's where this used to be. The band would go out and by the railroad tracks and take a smoke break. All kinds of adult things were smoked. And the trains came by often. The Dead actually implemented, they managed when they knew when the train was coming, and they switched to a certain groove that they were playing to match the sound of the train. Musicians love, there's so many train songs in American history, and these guys adapted it. But they had quite a sense of humor, right? The Grateful Dead. They kept seeing this sign out there, and they loved it. Caution, don't stop on the tracks. And they wrote a song called Caution and played it live up until 1981. And that was from the Belmont experience. That Jerry is not standing next to the tree. This is up in Marin County somewhere. So like any good live performance, you gotta have an after party, right? Something called the gig high, when you play live and you have a good time. You can't go to sleep, you're just amped up. And there's lots of stories of musicians walking around the house at 2 in the morning, like, what are you doing? I'm hungry, and I gotta take a shower. I think I'll go out. No. So, but here, after the guys performed at the in-room, they would connect with Peter Albin. Brother was Rodney Albin, 2 Carmont High School graduates, very gifted artists. And they were very close with Jerry from the folk and bluegrass and country days. The Albans lived in the near Cipriani, up in the hills of Belmont. And it was a short drive. They'd probably all get into Bill Kreutzmann's old station wagon. And the Albans had a large backyard with like a place for the boys to congregate. And there's a lot of cheap red wine involved, and these guys didn't have a lot of money. But I imagine they would always continue jamming, and they'd all pick up instruments. But musicians are very interesting. They're well read. They're up on current events. And there's really interesting banter when they take breaks. And I believe there was a lot of cross-fertilization of ideas and musical ideas and concepts, and probably some bizarre conversations too. But Peter Albin of Belmont, his brother launched the San Mateo Folk Festival, and 6,000 people showed up for that in '63 at College San Mateo. But Peter was the first to go to Haight-Ashbury, and he had an uncle who let him rent this Victorian mansion. The only reason Haight-Ashbury became popular, it was cheap and cool. You could he rented rooms $15 a month, 22-room Victorian. In the basement, he formed Big Brother and the Holding Company. Janis Joplin at this time was hitchhiking here from Texas with Chet Helms. If there's any novelists in the room, you gotta write that story. I picked up Janis Joplin. But Janis was on her way to meet this band, and they were formed in the basement. Also formed in the basement was Quicksilver Messenger Service and Sopwith Camel, which didn't last very long. But Quicksilver was a definitive rock and roll band. And this was the house that launched the whole thing, seen in Haight-Ashbury. This is the only picture we have that I can find of the in-room. I kind of love the big old 50s car, but it was a steak restaurant called the Steak Pit. And sometimes people, Moby Grape, another great band of the period, were having dinner at the Steak Pit. Like, thanks, honey, for taking me to the Steak Pit. And they heard a band playing, and they met Jerry at the bar, and Moby Grape was partly formed out of a connection at the in-room bar. So these guys, the Dead moved into Haight-Ashbury a year after Peter Albin did. Things were evolving quickly. Now, just point of history. In 1965, LSD was legal and marijuana was a felony. Go figure. And so these were spiritual cosmic explorers. They moved to 710 Ashbury Street, and between the Albin House on Page Street and the Dead House, the town was going to be, they're going to be lighting that place up. And they helped transform the Haight-Ashbury. I wanted to mention one thing. Jerry Garcia, who was a central figure in all of this, not just a master musician, but the most charismatic person with a very agile mind. And he was a social influencer to the max, as we call him today, a social influencer of the era. The type of music he wrote with the great lyricist Robert Hunter, who we met while Hunter was washing dishes in Palo Alto. And Hunter also had volunteered for the CIA-led experiments. It transformed him into a brilliant lyricist. The kind of music they wrote was most closely associated with transcendentalism, Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson. And that was a cultural renaissance. Just to look for parallels in history. I'm wrapping up here. If you ever have heard of Hair, the Broadway play, Hair was a commercial take on the whole Summer of Love. Of course, oversimplified character profiles, but when America is in a turbulent time, we turn to astrology, among other weird practices. Sorry, you can read the stars or you can do astrology. But this was the age of Aquarius, okay? What the heck does that mean, right? I never knew. I heard the songs, The Fifth Dimension. But this was, the age of Aquarius was believed to represent a shift towards humanitarianism, technological innovation, community, and higher consciousness. That's what they believed the society and the world was being transformed into. And moving away from, surprise, surprise, Pisces, which was rigid values of hierarchy and tradition. And those teen clubs I mentioned, the only rules they had were girls couldn't wear capri pants, boys couldn't wear jeans. That was it. So the age of Aquarius. Chet, Helms, and Janice arrived after hitchhiking, and they proceeded to, along with Bill Graham, open dance halls. The immersive experience, the higher consciousness, was all about music and dancing. Okay? And these were the big clubs. And I know my dear friend Carl Middlestat and his wife have been to most of these clubs. And they remember the shows. I promised Bridget that I would talk about The Boss. Yes, that's Bruce Springsteen's license. California license. He lived in, it says Belmont on it.
Sequoia Wood.
He was not a fan of psychedelic rock. He hammered out some pretty good Asbury Park, grooves, but he did play the Winterland Dance Hall in '78. So he makes the charts because he lived his parents lived here, and he closed Winterland. This is some of my favorite poster art. This is the bottom right one was done by that Shub, the guy who did the Rooms with Jerry. If you're writing transcendental type music, higher consciousness, and it's based on enjoying live music by moving your body, dancing, these are the Deadheads doing their thing. I saw my first Dead. I got on the bus in 1974. I saw the Dead in Boston, and they played at my alma mater for spring concerts in '79. But I'm a real rookie when it comes to live Dead shows. I love their music though. But this practice of rapturous dancing and following the band, this goes back to ancient Greece. This is an ancient way to celebrate it. If you Google on whirling dervishes, okay, or you can look at Dionysian Greek parties that lasted days on end. The Dead did pretty well. From Belmont with the in-room was kind of a hard drinking place, as we call it in Boston. So the Go-Go Girls had guards escorting them around, going out to their car, so you had to be on your toes there. The Dead, I don't know, what did they play in front of 25 people maybe on average? They did pretty well. They went up to Haight-Ashbury, had a free concert. This was their last show before they were moving, and this is where I wrap up. This is a snapshot of some of the greats that came through Belmont, through the peninsula. The guy on the bottom left is David Nelson. He was Jerry's closest collaborator. He's the founder of New Riders of Purple Sage, and he's still gigging to this day. So is Peter Alban. He had the original drummer with him for a show at the Guild in Menlo Park last month. So, if we have time for, I have a brief video clip, a montage of some of these artists. It's only 3 minutes or so, right? Oh, the Dead were moving. The bands had kind of had it with Haight-Ashbury. They used to use this term heads. They were heads. The heads moved to Haight-Ashbury. That was a head-based narcotic. It was a thinking person's spiritual exploration. The hard drugs, the body drugs, the hard drugs came in and replaced the stuff that these guys were experimenting with. And the hate got pretty nasty. Overcrowded, 75,000 dispossessed American kids hitchhiked there for the Summer of Love, overwhelmed the city. And you had a really hard, head-cracking kind of chief of police who did not like hippies. While they were dancing and twirling in Golden Gate Park, Ronald Reagan won by a landslide as governor in 1968. So not everybody was enamored with these guys. So the summer's over, summer break's over, the kids went home, the bands were like done with hippie tourism. This is one of a number of communes. There are about 70 communes that opened up after that summer. And now I just want to show you just a little sample of these folks.
Face to face, and a new community center for for Belmont would really be an incredibly valuable asset in that regard. So before you start your montage, I just want to big shout out to Eric for this amazing.